guys, it's your boy Luke here for our fades and sleepers for this week's Valero Texas Open. In this video, we'll be covering the most overhyped players for this week, my fades, and of course some of those diamonds in the rough that are being completely overlooked by the industry, my sleeper picks. The goal here is to help you fade some of that chalk is going to go out there and bust. Perhaps it's guys like Abraham Answer or Corey Connors that we'll talk about later, and I don't think end up coming through this week. Or it's some of my sleeper picks, perhaps a Bryson DeChambeau or even a Charlie Hoffman puke emoji that we'll be going to at low ownership and pretty good course history or pretty decent course fits. In either circumstance though, this is more of a game theory or strategy type of video meant for large field contests, GPP contests, at least specifically for Draftkings that you're looking to take down against 20, 30,000 other people in those type of contests, making sure that you can beat that chalk, deviate away from what everyone else is doing is going to be a key way to make sure you can be profitable. So with that being said, let's go ahead and hop right on into the strategy video for this week. All right, as always, we'll start off with our fades this week, and just want to go ahead and note that there is chalk that's worth eating. There's plenty of players up top that are going to get their fair amount of ownership that I will be playing. Some of them that come to mind are Rory McIlroy, who'll get plenty of ownership. Siwoo Kim's going to be a lower owned guy, so maybe we don't include him there, but people like Gary Woodland, especially down in this 8K range, like Johnny Vegas, Luke List, perhaps even guys like Mito Pereira and Patton Kizzire, they're going to get plenty of attention, but that's not going to keep me off of them. The real differentiating factor when you're trying to find somebody to fade is you got to find a reason to fade them. You don't just blindly fade people in PGA. If you do so, you're going to be wrong a lot more than you're right, because these are the best players in the world. Unless there's an actual reasoning behind why you think they're going to fail, you're likely just going to be trying to, at the very best, get lucky by chance. But up top, Abraham Answer has plenty of holes in his game, particularly if we take a look at his last 50 measured rounds. Over that stretch, he's been one of the worst golfers in the field, particularly around the green, where he's been negative 0.42 shots gained per round around the green. And really why I say he's quote-unquote one of the worst players in the field is he's priced over $10,000, and he's only gaining 8/100ths of a stroke per round on approach, a quarter of a stroke per round off the tee, and again, that's mostly due to accuracy, which will get it done here at TPC San Antonio because the fairways are extremely firm and fast. He will get a little bit of extra rollout, but the real problem here is the putter. He hasn't really been very good in any category. In total, that's put up just 17/100ths of a stroke gained per round, which is equivalent to somebody in that lower 7K range, maybe towards the high 6K range. It's usually somebody that's finishing in the top 25 at the very best. And if you take a look at his track record, at least with the recent form, it's been a little bit better, but it hasn't been all that much better. You can see he missed the cut at the Valspar, 33rd at the Players, also had a 39th place finish at the Genesis, so nothing real flashy there. And with the shots gained metrics, it also hasn't been very flashy. Still losing around the green, though it has been a little bit better. Gaining off the tee, gaining on approach, but much of his game has been carried by that putter, which has certainly been a little bit inconsistent of late. That's why he's at least been making cuts of late. But the long-term sample size, the last 50 measured rounds, again, are a little bit worse than what we've been seeing. So he could be due for a little bit of regression there. And for somebody priced over $10,000, he sure has a lot of question marks around him. If we take a look at some of the season-long rankings, few things that come out as problems for him would be, of course, the driving distance. He's number 99 on the PGA Tour. That's not ideal. This 50 to 125 yard range, we're going to have right around 19% of your approaches this week. He's 121 on tour, so that's not ideal. And in the over 200 yard range, where 3 of the 4 par 4s will be lying, and of course all 4 par 5s will be lying, he's number 138 on tour. So in terms of taking advantage of some of those longer holes that people like Rory McIlroy, even a Jordan Spieth, or of course Bryson DeChambeau will be able to take care of, he's not going to be able to do so. So just a lot of question marks for Abe Answer. He's coming in at 16.5% ownership, which is very significant, especially when you compare him to guys like Jordan Spieth and Hideki Matsuyama. He's higher owned than them. And if you just compare him to Bryson DeChambeau, who of course we'll talk about a little bit later when our sleeper picks come up, it's a good 3, almost 4% difference between the two players. So Abraham Answer, if he was in the mid 8K range, he would certainly be a good value in terms of points per dollar, but in the 10K range and still garnering a significant amount of ownership, he becomes a pretty clear fade for me. All right, and now moving on to our second fade of the slate. That's going to be Corey Connors at $9,800, who is the second highest owned player on the slate at 22.5% ownership. It's not like he doesn't model out well. You take a look, he's top 10 in all 3 categories there on the left. The real problem comes with the price tag, first of all. Somebody who probably should be closer to $9,000 than he is in the $10,000 range, and also somebody that deals with a ton of problems on the POA Anua surface. If you guys haven't seen my course breakdown video, you guys will have to note that this is a POA Anua surface. Usually we have Bermuda grass here. Sometimes it'll be overseeded with POA, but this year the GSCAA gave us a pure POA tribulus overseed. That's what we're going to see in pretty much the entire golf course. Even a lot of the Bermuda grass rough has died out at this point of the year. I would have to attribute that to the weather. Of course, if you're looking for a complete breakdown of how that'll affect play this week, go ahead and check out my course breakdown video. By far the best piece of content I put out every single week. But in either circumstance, Corey Conners should be a little bit lower in price, but certainly shouldn't be 22.5% owned. If we take a look at the last 24 measured rounds, you'll see a player that's playing well with the ball striking, which of course Corey Conners is always going to be among the best players regardless of field when it comes to tee to green play. But the real issue comes around the green and also with the putting. He's somebody who has been a well-improved player in both of those categories. Certainly in the past, he had been averaging well into the negatives, both around the green, especially with the putter, closer to half a stroke loss per round with the putter. But of late, he's just been average, right? He's been right around a tour average player. So even though the narrative behind Corey Conners is that he's going out there, has looked like a short game wizard, that hasn't necessarily been the case. If we take a look at the last 50 measured rounds, you'll see that a lot of the ball striking numbers will retain, but the around the green play does seep into the negative, and the putter is still just a slight positive. So sure, Corey Conners is much improved with the short game, but it's not like he's taken himself from one of the worst players on tour around the green, one of the worst putters on tour, to an elite level player. He just hasn't done that. And at this golf course, TPC San Antonio, where we have these raised greens, tons of undulation, they tend to kind of simulate what players are going to see at Augusta National. That is going to be a problem. So again, if he was cheaper, if he was coming in with moderate ownership, let's say 14, maybe even 15% ownership, I'd be willing to give to him. He would definitely be somebody that would be looking to play. I mean, just look at last week's picks, right? He was one of our core value plays. But at this type of ownership, at this type of price tag, going to be somebody that I'm actively looking to pivot off of. I mean, guys like Bryson, who, again, I said before that we talk about a little bit later, Siwoo Kim, Maverick McNeely, Gary Woodland are all plays that I'd much prefer to go to than somebody like a Corey Conners at lower ownership, and in some of those cases also at lower price tags. And now lastly, the last fade we'll be talking about is Chris Kirk at $9,400. Something I have to say about him is he's a great play, much like Corey Conners, right? The modeling absolutely loves him this week. If he were to just take a blind numbers approach this week, just play the quote-unquote best plays on the board, Chris Kirk and Corey Conners would be on that short list. The unfortunate part is that we're playing for GPP contests, large field, game theory type of plays, where Chris Kirk and Corey Conners, unfortunately, tip over the scale of ownership. He comes in at 21.4% ownership, which is well above a lot of his peers in this range. That's a whole 7% more than Maverick. It's a whole almost 9% more than Siwoo Kim. It's even more than Gary Woodland, somebody that's looked excellent over the last month or so on tour, and a much higher pedigree player than somebody like a Chris Kirk. So there's plenty of pivots in that range to go to. Chris Kirk, of course, relatively short player. Like I said with Abraham Answer, he's kind of going to be able to get away with that a little bit this week. But let's go ahead and take a look at the shots gained metrics, where a lot of people are falling in love with Chris Kirk, right? Gaining a ton off the tee, gaining a ton on approach, gaining a ton around the green, and even gaining with the putter. Seemingly this guy doesn't have a weakness, and trust me, I get it. But let's look at the recent form, where he does have some good finishes, but the last time out for Chris Kirk, missed cut at the Players. You know, those solid finishes, the API, Honda. Also had a few solid finishes before that as well. In fact, it was a 33rd finish. I believe it was another top 25 finish as well. So he certainly went on a little good run of play. But let's look at the last 50 measured rounds. The putter comes back down to earth. Around the green, still pretty solid, but the approach numbers and the off the tee numbers get a little bit more modest. He's somebody that, like I said, still a great play. He's one of the better players, up-and-coming players. You know, he's been around for a while, but his game is starting to get to that next level. But he should be priced in the high 8K range at the very most, not the mid 9K range. And he also should be probably 12 to 13% owned. Both of those numbers, of course, being exceeded pretty vastly by both of those accounts. And even though he is a good play by the numbers, somebody I'm avoiding for these large field GPPs. He's somebody who we know is inconsistent. I mean, we've seen that over the last year or so. Even when he's been playing a much improved brand of golf, he'll go out there and miss let's say 2 out of every 5 cuts. He's not afraid to do that. He definitely contends when he does get through a cut line, so that's something that we have to give a knock there to Chris Kirk. But you can't tell me that he's twice as likely as Siwoo Kim to succeed this week, twice as likely as a Bryson DeChambeau, or even third more likely than somebody like a Maverick McNeely to go out there and succeed this week. That's just not the case. In fact, Maverick McNeely is a better play per my numbers this week than somebody like a Chris Kirk. You can see the projected cut rate higher for Maverick in terms of the projection, also much higher for Maverick McNeely. A lot of that comes down to the putting numbers. On POA, Chris Kirk struggles. You know who else struggles on POA Nua? Corey Connors. You know who else kind of struggles on POA Nua? Abraham Answer, right? Only gains 16 170 stroke per round on that surface, whereas in most other surfaces, Answer is closer to a half stroke gain per round, right? He's gaining 4/10 of a stroke per round over his last 24 measured rounds. So that's one of the key differentiating factors I used to find some of my fades this week. And coincidentally, they're also some of the higher owned plays on the slate. So kind of made a lot of that decision-making process for us, and that's why they're going to be our fades of the week. Now let's go ahead and talk about our sleeper picks, where we're going to go ahead and start off with Bryson DeChambeau at $10,200. And of course, last week, he was one of our fades. It was somebody who I expected him to look rusty, and especially for Wednesday's round against Richard Bland, that was certainly the case. It ended up being won by an over par score. I believe Bryson ended up winning or ended up tying with Richard Bland at a score of like +1 or +2. So some really sloppy golf, especially for Austin Country Club, where it can be strategic. It has some holes that can be difficult, but you can certainly take it to 3-4 under par very realistically. He wasn't able to do that. So I was kind of victory lapping at that point. But on Thursday, he started to look a little bit better, especially the approach play. He hit some beautiful iron shots in there to just a few feet. Ended up having a very solid match there. And then on Friday, he started hitting those 370, 380-yard bombs. And that's where I started to get a little bit concerned. I mean, he had been eliminated from his group at that point, so our fade looked pretty good last week. But at the same time, he's starting to look like his old self. And you guys know I am a huge Bryson DeChambeau fan. Not his antics off the field, or I should say off the course. Just his play in general, especially his mindset, is something that I absolutely adore. It's just very out of the box. It's the way that you should be as a golfer. I don't think everyone should be trying to do the same thing. And some of the things like he does with the one-length irons, of course, a lot of his calculations with trying to figure out distances, how far balls will bounce out, that sort of stuff, is right up my alley. But at this golf course specifically, he's an extremely, let's say, intriguing course fit. He's got the distance off the tee that we're looking for. As long as he's not spraying it into the woods here, he's going to get away with that off the tee. And he has told us that he's going to go ahead and lay back a little bit off the tee here. He's going to take a little bit off of the driver. And there's one thing that Bryson DeChambeau can do. When he takes something off the driver, he can be incredibly accurate. He does have that fairway finder swing. And much like an Abraham Answer, a few of the other shorter hitters on tour, you're going to get a little bit of that rollout. So if he just gears back a little bit, maybe gets it out there just 340, 350 this week rather than the 370, 380-yard bombs, he still gets an extra 20, 30 yards rollout and is playing from well above where everyone else is going to be playing. I really like that type of mindset for Bryson if he can just kind of tone it down a little bit. But if he's going out there hitting those 370, 380-yard bombs, of course, that's going to be another way to take apart this course. If you're hitting it out there 400 yards in every single hole, it's going to be very easy to make 6-7 birdies in a round around this track. So I do like him at $10,200. He's always one of the best fantasy players in the world because of his volatility, how many birdies he makes per round. So as a result, even if he doesn't end up winning this golf tournament, if he finishes, let's say, the top 10, top 15, could very easily crack the optimal lineup. So Bryson DeChambeau, always somebody that's much better than his finishing position when it comes to DFS. And as a result, somebody that I play almost every single time he tees it up. I mean, last time out as a fade, that was one of the exceptions to the rule, right? Of course, he was coming off the injury. So we'll have to see this week. He's not going to be somebody that I'm locking into lineups. He's not a core pick for us this week. They're just 12.8% ownership. Definitely somebody that I'm willing to go to. And of course, we could look at the shots gain metrics for Bryson DeChambeau, but we don't have to. We know that this guy's an absolute stud off the tee. The approach play is going to be inconsistent. The around the green play also going to be a little bit inconsistent. He's going to gain a ton of strokes with the putter. You can see on Poa Nua, he's gaining over 0.8 of a stroke per round. So tends to like this Poa Anua surface. And something to note about Bryson is at the match play, he was making absolutely everything. He was just an absolute machine with that flat stick. He was making 10 to 20 footers all day. He was even sinking 40 to 50 foot putts from time to time, which of course kept him in matches. He was really, he looked a lot more involved in the matches than a lot of people expected him to be. And he might be a little bit closer to 100% than he is 75% at this point, like he's been leading on to us. Next up, we're going to have Tony Fino, who's another play on the sleeper pick list who isn't a very sexy pick by any means. He's $9,100. He's been in quote unquote the worst stretch of golf of his life, and that's right out of his words, right out of his mouth directly. But if you take a look at the shots gained metrics, they're really not all that bad. He's still gaining off the tee, of course. A lot of the reason why he's not elite with that, not among guys like Keegan Bradley or Chris Kirk, is because of the accuracy. He's been dealing with a little bit of issues there, but still gaining significantly on approach rate, around half a stroke per round. Around the green, hasn't been quite as stout as what we're used to seeing from Tony. He's typically a lot better than that. And while he's not a prolific gainer around the green, he has been in seasons in 2017 and 2018. He was among the best players on tour around the green. He's usually a little bit better than what he is right now, right? If you take a look at it, he's usually closer to right around a neutral around the green player, but losing nearly a third of a stroke per round. And the putter, always going to be a problem for Fino, right? He's a team no-putt captain. He's going to pretty much finish top 10 if he doesn't have the putter, though. That's how good the ball striking is. Of course, the around the green play, when it's not bleeding strokes like it has been over the last 24 measured rounds, is also usually pretty serviceable. But when he gains with that putter, he can run away with fields, right? That's why we expect Tony Fino to win a lot more than he has on tour. That's why his I should say 2 tour wins to this point are surprising to us. But in DFS formats, we don't need the guy to win, right? That top 10 where he's making a ton of birdies, going out there, posting 6 to 7 birdies per round, much like a Bryson DeChambeau, is going to be more than enough. And everything I just said about Bryson and his length, how he's going to be able to leverage that into extra birdies. The rough here is almost non-existent. As long as he's not hitting the ball into the trees, he's going to be all right, is the same exact story with Tony Fino. The really only difference between Bryson and Tony Fino, the reason why he's $1,000 more expensive, is of course the putter, right? Bryson DeChambeau, a much more consistent putter than Tony Fino. But at the same time, Tony Fino is much more consistent with the approach play, right? Like I said, gaining nearly half a stroke per round in that category. So at $9,100, I'm buying in on the Tony Fino train. It's important to note as well that last week at the match play against Xander Schauffele, in that match, it was his last match of the week. He had already lost 2 matches. He looked excellent, made a ton of birdies. In fact, made 9 birdies on the round. Completely torched Xander Schauffele, who didn't really have his best stuff, but it didn't matter. I mean, just Tony Fino went out there and absolutely boat raced him. So at that type of price tag, coming in with some good juju out of that last match, perhaps goes out there, putts a little bit well too, right? On Poa Anua, it's the one surface on tour that he gains strokes on, right? So a lot of things going for him this week. I expect him to have a huge bounce back here. And now lastly, the last sleeper pick we're going to here, the last guy we're going to touch on for this video, going to be Charlie Hoffman at $8,200. And I know, puke emoji like I said during the introduction. This guy is not on my list of nice players. He's definitely somebody who has some public relation problems at this point of his career, but at this golf course specifically, has been no better player. If we take a look at the course history for Charlie Hoffman, it is just outstanding. Second place finish last year, of course, finished second to Jordan Spieth, second in 2019, right? So he's been the bridesmaid 2 years in a row. 64th in 2018, whatever, at least he made the cut. 40th in 2017, whatever. Won in 2016, but before that, he also has 2 more top 5 finishes. I mean, just the guy, every single time he shows up to the Valero Texas Open, is just a print fest. You might as well start calling this the Charlie Hoffman Open, right? You might as well just be the tournament host at this point at $8,200. Even though he's coming in with some of the worst form of the entire field, you can see number 137 recent form rank. He's shot some 80s over the last month. I'm willing to buy back in on it, right? We saw Jordan Spieth buck the trend at the Pebble Beach. He was coming in with absolutely dreadful form. Was also a sleeper pick for us that week. Ended up shaking through that and finishing in second place. Charlie Hoffman has that same type of upside. Of course, he's been around on tour for God knows how long at this point, almost 2 decades at this point. And his swing is down. He's just in a little bit of a down stretch, and I definitely expect him to get out of it sooner rather than later. So somebody I'm buying in on early. If he was coming in with decent form, he would first off probably be right around $9,600 in this field, and he would probably be close to 20, maybe 25% owned as well. He'd be one of those chalky plays because Charlie Hoffman, when he's playing his best golf, of course, he's had a lot of those finishes at this golf course. We know he's a good course fit. He's accurate off the tee. The approach play is among some of the best in the world. He's solid around the green, and the putting can definitely be leave some to be desired there, right? He's not the best putter on tour, but on Poa Nua specifically, he's gaining 0.2 of a stroke per round. So for whatever reason, much like a Tony Finau, whenever he gets out there on these bumpy surfaces like what they're going to have this week, he's had some success in the past. So at just 6.9% projected ownership, going to be somebody that I'm going to as a sleeper pick. That is all I've got for this week's fades and sleepers. Before we go on and get out of here, go ahead and leave a comment down below with first off your biggest fade this week and of course your biggest sleeper pick. For me, I'm going to have to go with Bryson as my biggest sleeper. Maybe Charlie Hoffman just because he's been in such bad form might qualify as a bigger sleeper, but my biggest fade going to be Corey Connors. There's no doubt about it. The highest owned player on the slate that I'm fading, and somebody who's coming in with that scorching hot form, recent champion at this event, but I'll be going to be fading him this week. But go ahead and let me know your thoughts down below, whether it agrees with me or not. As always, going to have even more content coming this week. Look out for our DFS live stream tomorrow at 7 p.m. Eastern time. I'll go ahead and leave a link in the description for that so you can go ahead and leave a reminder. But there we'll be covering the weather, my player pool projections, any live questions that you have down in the chat, cash plays, pretty much anything that you guys want to cover to get you guys prepared for locks. So make sure to stop by tomorrow. Again, that's at 7 p.m. Eastern time. Also, we're going to have showdown content this weekend. We're back to stroke play, so going to be able to cover that for you guys. Also going to have more prize picks videos. I already have one up for round 1, so if you're already over there on prize picks, make sure to go ahead and check that out, and make sure to stop by throughout the weekend for all of the episodes when they drop. I appreciate you guys stopping by. Make sure you like the video if you haven't already. Make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't already as well. That way you don't miss any of that content when it drops. I appreciate you guys. Best of luck with all of your lineups this week, and let's get this cash.